Anybody who's ever played the seminal Souls game Demon Souls can attest to the convolution of its levels. These are prisons, each presided over by a demonic warden, from which not even death provides escape. In Demon Souls, you play as a demon slayer, trapped in an endless cycle of undeath, your soul being tied to the Nexus, the last bastion against an all-pervasive fog outside which threatens to dissolve reality. You must travel to different realms, grow stronger by collecting souls from vanquished foes, and eventually quell the root of the fog, the slumbering Old One. Like the genre it sired, Demon Souls is notorious for its punishing difficulty. Penalties for dying, such as a reduced health bar, alongside dangerous monsters and invading players, can make it off-putting for newcomers. But persevere, and not only will you reap the rewards for your earlier struggles, but you'll also be treated to an interactive tour through the work of Piranesi. Let me take you back to Venice in the 1700s. The canals have turned fetid, the art sold out, and the heirs to the tradition of Carpaccio and Gentile Bellini have settled for selling pictures of the Rialto Bridge to tourists. Canaletto, Bellotto and the Gardi brothers, the painters who catered for this market, in their spare time enjoyed imagining other cities and fantastic visions of their own. One of their contemporaries, Giovanni Battista Piranesi, is often excluded from their number because he was a draftsman and a printmaker. The son of a stonemason and master builder, Piranesi's infatuation with infinitesimal architecture derived from the practical training he received in structural and hydraulic engineering from a maternal uncle employed by the Venetian waterworks, and his interest in the historic achievements of Roman architecture from his brother, who was a Carthusian monk. This thorough appreciation of structures as bricks and mortar distinguishes his work from the anodyne, pedestrian cityscapes of Canaletto and company. His decadent, pessimistic visions of doomed, moribund megacities are what allows him to defy provincialism and fuel the macabre, ecstatic worlds of modern literature, dystopian science fiction cinema, and Japanese video games. Piranesi's Carceri are arguably his most influential engravings. Sold as souvenirs, his images of prisons as cruelly proliferating megacities reflect simultaneously on the origins and interconnectedness of architecture and law. His infatuation with Roman architecture not only appealed to tourists travelling to see the cradle of Western civilization, but betrayed an artist who, despite thwarted ambition, imagined himself as one of Venice's great architects. However, by the 18th century, there was nothing new left to build in the city. It was a museum. Instead, Piranesi engaged in his own form of world building, fabricating supposed antiques from fragments of ancient Roman sculpture he and others had excavated. As John Ruskin would later describe, Venice was destined to becoming a ghost upon the sands of the sea. But the Carceri addressed morbidity in another way. They reflected disturbances to traditional systems of economics, taxation, and guilds in 18th century Italy, which was divided by the War of the Spanish Succession. The penal code collapsed, and new criminal laws brought into force. Violence, crisis, and upheaval were thus the backdrop of Piranesi's engravings. Prison conditions were also dire. When Piranesi was in his 20s in 1755, Casanova, the Italian adventurer and author, was arrested by the Inquisition for crimes ranging from blasphemy to enticing Venetian aristocrats to Freemasonry. His tryst with a nun didn't help his cause either. He was taken from his home to the Doge's palace and, without trial, locked in a cell high in the building, which remains to this day. The space from floor to ceiling is 5 foot. Piranesi and his fellow humanist intellectuals of the Enlightenment reproached this judicial system by comparing the social order of Venice to a prison. As his engravings intimated, it was like the boundary that separated the abyssal otherworld of the prison and the outside world had deteriorated to the extent that anyone could unwittingly slip between the two. The boundaries of prisons themselves appeared to reach out and capture victims in their sleep. For the architect, however, there was pleasure to derive from this purgatory. As the designer, Piranesi's imagination wanders through spatial paradoxes, including a staircase that exists on two planes simultaneously. Here, there are no limits aside from your freedom. The Carceri afforded endless possibilities, prison interiors without outer walls, cut off only by the limitations of the frame. The spaces are so vast, so continuous, that they might not be interiors at all. His imaginary prisons might be cities that have already grown into worlds of their own, where interior and exterior are no longer distinguishable. There are views through arches of almost recognizable Roman sites, the colonnade of St. Peter's for instance, but there is nothing informing us of whether these mark terminal points of the prison. They are simply subsumed by it. If inside and outside no longer exist, up and down are the only discernible registers of power. While prisoners endure mysterious torments, luckier souls pass by on parapets or bridges that have no logic or necessity. Piranesi argued that architecture should indulge in grotesque ornament. The architecture of his imaginary prisons is redundant, superfluous. His punishments are inscrutable. A wheel with spikes around its circumference, a post with more spikes, a chandelier suspended from a beam, which on closer inspection might be rigged with meat hooks, pulleys, one of which raises and lowers a basket big enough to contain a person into a huge marble vat. Yet in most etchings, we don't see anyone being tortured. It's all implicit. A couple of prison guards or prisoners forced into labour dig a grave in the middle of the prison. Elsewhere, we see glimpses of the imprisoned, a man being pulled on a rack, naked figures chained to posts, while high above it looks like a musician plays the fiddle. Is he tormenting them or comforting them, like the former noble's wife does in the Tower of Latria? Higher still, spectators gather on a vertiginous walkway. Sometimes it becomes difficult to distinguish prisoner from guard, or both from visitor. The suggestion is that regardless, everyone in these places is a prisoner. But at the same time, like us playing Demon Souls, they might be here by some perverse choice. There is a languid quality to it all. The tortures and chains are relaxed, almost consensual. Like the Carceri, the worlds of Demon Souls ostensibly have no rationalised or evident plan. But of course, as designed levels in a video game, they do. They simply serve to make arbitrary power expressive and visible through the sheer mass of structure, which dwarfs players, and to the darkness which pervades all, despite the immensity of these cavernous spaces. As the game's difficulty reminds, the levels are sites for a sort of torture we subject ourselves to, kinds of incarceration and exemplary punishment we relish. A similar infinite monumentality underscores the architectural fantasy of one of Demon Souls' successors, Bloodborne. Playing much the same, Bloodborne takes place in a neo-Victorian city on the night of an endless hunt. You play as a hunter of hunters who have become frenzied with bloodlust and transformed into the same beasts they are hunting. Mild spoilers ahead, like Piranesi, Bloodborne suggests its city is a palimpsest. As Piranesi attributed architectural magnitude to ancient Rome, so too the game does the same to its subterranean ancient civilization, whose occult blood rituals have percolated their way to the surface and infected everybody above. Like Piranesi, the inimitability of so-called Soulsborne games lies in their antiquarian interests. They present fragmentary and disrupted worlds, encouraging a double vision from players in which a grand reconstructive view of former civilizations is imaginatively superimposed on surviving fragments. One wonders, what was life in the Bolitarian Palace like before the demonic fog arrived? Or in Yharnam before the blood ministration became widespread? Who lived here? Were they always like this? Did these calamities completely transform them, or merely exacerbate pre-existing issues? Another scarcely mentioned feature of the Soulsborne games that ties into Piranesi's wider work relates to what John Wilton-Ely terms gesticulating humanity. Sekiro notwithstanding, Soulsborne protagonists are mute. Thus, when players cooperate with or invade one another, their prime means of communication are gestures. Characters admonish and point out to us what is happening, or beckon us to see or show some marvellous or dangerous thing up ahead, or invite us to lament or celebrate together with them, all in the shadow of structures that diminish language and defy description. As mute spectators, we are simply left to make sense of the inscriptions that disappear before our eyes. Epigraphy is paramount in these games after all. It complements both their gameplay and themes. Players summon each other into games by using summon signs they inscribe onto the floor, which vanish upon use. Similarly, their stories take place in dying worlds, presided over by heroes and rulers driven mad with determination to ensure their marks in the world outlive entropy. Piranesi and his precursors too shared this fascination with the instability of inscription. In an etching for the frontispiece to his collection of engravings of imaginary structures, Piranesi depicts a figure gesturing towards words almost entirely obscured by natural forces that swirl before him. Threats to their intelligibility, such as the destructive vegetation, are entirely indifferent to what's inscribed, a list of dedicatees. He may have been born 300 years ago, but Piranesi's dream of designing universes eventually came true. It's testament to the enduring appeal of his engravings that they continue to exert an influence on how we imagine power, cruelty, and inescapable prisons. And looking forward to the next entry in the unofficial Soulsborne series, Elden Ring, one wonders how Piranesi's work might be further reimagined. Whatever shape it takes, I'm sure it will suitably hold our attentions captive.